The ancient Greeks are famous worldwide for their philosophy, inventions, understanding of maths, science and medicine, incredible armies, and their early forms of democracy. There are many articles, books, TV specials, and so on that go over the greatest deeds of the ancient Greeks, but that isn't what we're here to talk about today. In today's video, we're going to be going over the strange, bizarre, absurd, and disgusting facts about the ancient Greeks, the things you didn't hear hailed as much as their greater achievements. Number 10. The ancient Greeks preferred a sort of blurred unibrow on their women. Today, having a unibrow is considered to be among the highest tier of fashion don'ts, along with things like the fanny pack and wearing sandals with socks. Many people will not only shave, but even painfully pluck their eyebrows today in order to avoid even the slightest appearance of one. And at least for women, unless you're Frida Kahlo, there are many looks that minimize eyebrows. However, fashion goes in and out of, well, fashion, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Back in the days of ancient Greece, the men definitely preferred the eyebrows to be a little more connected than they tend to be today. We do want to clear up a misconception, though, as some people have heard about this and are under the impression that Greek men liked whole, uninterrupted unibrows on their women. As far as historians can tell, though, what they were attracted to was more of a blurred unibrow, where it wasn't fully joined, but only partially, to the points where you could notice the contrast up close, but perhaps not tell too well from a distance. Number 9. A ridiculous amount of Athenians were actually enslaved by full citizens. Today, ancient Athens is considered to be one of the earliest bastions of democracy, learning, and free thought, which is kind of surprising because a huge amount of the population at any given time were either enslaved or didn't have the rights of full citizens. For starters, only those who were actually born of Athens or families from Athens could ever be full citizens, which meant at any given time there were a large number of nationals living in Athens who had citizenships in other parts of Greece or elsewhere. These people were treated mostly with respect and could do business and live temporarily in Athens, but they had no real say in the Athenian system. And then, in terms of slaves, the numbers are hard to pin down. Ancient Athens was around for quite some time, so it's likely these numbers fluctuated at different points, but some estimates put the number at about 150,000 citizens, 50,000 nationals, and roughly 100,000 slaves, and that was around the year 432 BC. Of course, sometimes overall population numbers written down from ancient times are hard to prove, or are believed to potentially be exaggerations by historians. So we're looking at you, Herodotus. However, while we may not know the actual number for sure, and they may have changed throughout history, it is clear that at least a significant minority was enslaved at any given time. Number 8. Spartan warriors were guided by flutes and sang war hymns before battle. In modern times, the Spartans, despite being a relatively small population in a small space, are still infamous for their past deeds and known as being among the most manly warriors to ever walk the land. However, what many people might not think about is how combat actually looked back in the day. Nowadays we have radio communication, but back in the old days, armies usually used some kind of music to give orders and keep people in battle in their proper lineup. And the Spartans, they were no exception to this rule, but most people who imagine them going into battle with music would probably imagine drums or some kind of tough-sounding instruments. But this wasn't the case. The favored musical instrument for giving instruction in battle for the Spartans was actually a flute, a musical instrument that many people now associate with femininity. Also, the Spartans going to battle really was almost a holiday-like affair for them, so perhaps the music was a way of adding some extra levity. It is really said that the Spartans' training routine was actually so brutal that going to battle was actually sort of a bit of a break for them. Number 7. The Olympic torch relay did not originate in ancient Greece. Today, the Olympic torch relay is considered a pretty much essential part of the Olympic Games, and most couldn't imagine the Games without it. It helped build up hype, and people like to stand along parade lines watching the torch pass and cheering along the relay runners. However, the truth is that while the ancient Greeks did employ a ritual fire, they did not do any kind of torch relay. Instead, the entire thing was dreamed up by Carl Diem, the organizer of the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. Now, Diem was not himself a member of the Nazi Party, but the Nazi Party was running the country, and Goebbels saw Diem's idea as great propaganda. The idea was that the relay would show the games symbolically going from the ruins of ancient Greece all the way to modern Germany. This was an attractive idea to Hitler, as he admired the ancient Greeks and felt that the Germans, being the proper Aryan race, were the rightful heirs to the ancient Greeks. While the Olympic torch relay has become synonymous with the Games, it has not, as some in the Third Reich once hoped, made it synonymous with the glory of Germany or the supposed Aryan race. Number 6. Athens' famous democracy wasn't really quite how many people envision it. Today, people like to think of Athens as the cradle of democracy, and while it was advanced for its time, it was hardly a fair system, as most people didn't actually have a say. For starters, at any given time, the population of Athens had a lot of slaves, as we mentioned before, and those slaves couldn't vote. While some sources say during the greatest age of Athens, the slave population was about a third, some sources suggest that near the same time period, about the early 400s BC, the slave population was actually closer to about 60%. Considering non-resident foreigners and women, along with the aforementioned slaves, were unable to vote, this narrowed down the voting population even further. Also, you had to be over 18 to vote, which means that some estimates suggest that the population of voting people was only about 40,000 citizens, which would suggest only 15% of the population could actually vote at any given time. Now, some sources do suggest the slave percentage was a lot lower, and historical records on the exact population numbers at any given time are mostly estimates. But the point is that the vote was limited to a very small demographic of the overall population at any given time. Number 5. The Spartans had a slave population called Helots that they hunted every year. Something that is often glossed over when kids are being told the history of the Spartans is how they managed to take care of their agricultural needs. With all the men being warriors and all the women doing homemaking, it does leave the question of how their farming and other basic labor needs were met. Well, the Spartan solution was a population of slaves they called the Helots, although some sources suggest they might have once been a group of Messenians who were conquered long ago. Regardless, in various sources, they tend to outnumber the Spartans by different figures, depending on the time period, but always by absurd margins. This left the Spartans in constant fear of a revolt, a fear that was realistic as multiple revolts were attempted and eventually successful. In order to strike fear into the hearts of the Helots and make it less likely for them to rebel, they would ritually have their newest and youngest warriors hunt the toughest and bravest Helots every autumn. As we mentioned, the Helots eventually did manage to successfully revolt, showing that no matter how tough a group of warriors you are, when your slaves vastly outnumber you, you can't control them forever. Number 4. Ancient Greeks diluted their wine. They considered it uncultured not to. Ancient Greeks and ancient Romans were known for their love of wine, and some people imagine that pretty much everyone was getting drunk on a regular basis, especially those with a lot of wealth or power. And while there is some truth to this in any time period, after all, rich people and poor people sometimes do drink to excess, people may have a bit of a confused picture of the situation. The truth is that the ancient Greeks believed in watering down their wine, usually with a ratio of at least 3 parts water to 1 part wine. In fact, they considered it rather barbaric and uncouth to go drinking wine without diluting it with water first. The ancient Romans are said to have diluted it even further, sometimes to a ratio of 10 to 1. Some historians have pointed out that this is more like adding some wine to your water than adding water to your wine, and it might have been an attempt to kill off bacteria and make a glass of water safer to drink while still keeping your wits about you. Number 3. Married women were not allowed to watch the naked Olympic competitors. While many people like to think of the ancient Greeks as a very sexually free culture, and there is some truth to this compared to today, like many cultures of the time period, one thing they were absolutely not okay with was adultery. And for this reason, situations that might give someone adulterous desires were something that the ancient Greek authorities believed should be avoided. Now, this presented a bit of a problem when it came to the Olympic Games, as the men competed entirely in the nude. For this reason, married women were not allowed to watch, as they may get lustful desires for men who were not their husbands. This meant that they couldn't even watch their husbands compete if he happened to be in the games, because there might be other naked men that she could see as well. While this emphasis is put on married women, married men, as we mentioned, could still compete in the games, and young single women could see them compete and potentially make advances towards them afterwards. The rule here has an expectation that the party most likely to commit adultery would be an unfaithful woman. Number 2. Their methods for wiping after defecation were almost entirely unpleasant. Most people have heard of the famed bathroom and plumbing systems of ancient Rome and the relatively advanced systems in cities like ancient Athens. And in modern days, many people have also learned that the Roman sewer system, in particular, could actually be a bit of a horror show. However, what would probably alarm folks more than anything when it came to the bathroom hygiene habits of the Romans and Greeks was how they cleaned up afterwards. Of course, they didn't have toilet paper back in those days, so instead they used a sponge on a stick. Before and after using it to wipe, the stick was either left in a channel of running water or dunked in a bucket of water that was also mixed with salt and vinegar. The really gross part is that the stick was communal, meaning that in public bathrooms you could be cleaning up with a sponge that was used by a lot of other people. However, sometimes things got inventive and there wasn't always a single standard method. According to the theory of a French anthropologist named Philippe Charlier, the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks may have sometimes used small, flattish stones, without too many rough edges presumably, in order to clean up after defecation. And we guess that it still beats the 3 seashell method. Number 1. Part of testing a Spartan baby's strength was dunking it in wine. The Spartans were known for being incredibly unforgiving to little ones, and were known for practicing one of the earliest and most shocking forms of eugenics. They were known for testing babies for any birth defects, weaknesses, or other abnormalities, and then literally tossing the baby out as garbage if they didn't pass muster. However, before the baby was brought before a group of elders, he had to go through the wine test. The wine test is about as messed up as it sounds. They would bathe the newborn baby in wine, and then just wait and see what happens. If the baby convulsed and died, obviously it was too weak to be a proper Spartan warrior, and now the shamed father could throw the baby out and move on and hopefully make a better baby. If the baby didn't convulse and die from being bathed in wine, he would be taken before a group of elders. The old men would then decide the newborn's fate, looking it over for any sign of weakness, and decide whether it would have a harsh life growing up knowing nothing but pain and war, or whether it would be left on a mountainside to die. And on that cheery note, I really hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please do hit that like button below, and don't forget to subscribe. Brand new videos every day of the week. Why not subscribe to another channel I do called Biographics, Biographies of Notable People from History. Do check that out, there is a link below. And as always, thank you for watching.